All right, everyone. Hello. This is welcome to Pensive Politics, Mr. Watson. I'm your host, Christian Watson, and today we have a little bit of a new kind of episode that I'm doing. I am hosting the first ever Pensive Politics debate. So it's a little bit weird for me to be moderating the debate. I'm typically always involved in the debate. And normally, if this was a normal podcast, I would wait like 10 minutes or more for folks can come in. But we'll proceed as normal since we have time constraints, things of that sort. So we're the debate topic, excuse me, the resolution. The topic is about anarchy and minarchism. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, I will give you a very short rundown. There are sort of two primary schools of thought in libertarian philosophy. Well, not schools of thought, but two modes of action. There's the anarchist mode and there's a minarchist mode. The anarchists believe that centralized control and power, and as one of our debaters will explain, is not the best way to form a free society, whereas the minarchist believes that there needs to be some modicum of centralized control or power to protect and preserve rights, whereas the anarchists believe that power itself is actually a violation of rights. So here with me today, I have two people who represent two sides of that perspective. The debate's going to be very, very simple. Both people will have introductory remarks which will last at least 2 to 3 minutes. And then there will be a sort of back and forth between these two people, most likely on what they said in their remarks. And then I will ask some questions. Hopefully you guys will pose some questions as well in the chat. And then we'll have closing remarks. So if Carson, if you'd like to go first, you are free to do so whenever you'd like to. And I will keep a timer, so you just let me know when you're ready.
All right, awesome. So just start up with the opening remarks.
Yes.
Okay, so awesome. I'll start, I guess, right now then. So the first thing, obviously, I'd like to, basically thank you, Cafe, for engaging in this debate with me because obviously, I think personally, libertarianism is a very important debate between these two topics, to consider if, anarchy or minarchy is more important overall, and it's, to me, at least, of the utmost importance between these two topics. However, I do believe that this debate is actually rather easily resolved in the idea that from both a utilitarian and an objective moral, basically, standpoint, anarchy is the proper and logical continuation of libertarianism. For example, anarchy, of course, it's a purest fulfillment, basically, of the principles upon which libertarianism is based, and namely liberty and, by extension, property. And it's essentially the purest and, I would say, the most undiluted manifestation of libertarianism. So by default, it is, I would say, the morally superior to a flawed version of, I guess you could say, libertarianism, or basically the manifestation of liberty, because that flawed version is essentially, it degrades, and it's a degenerate version of the morals which basically libertarians claim to uphold. So I think that anarchy is also another thing that I think about I think it's a clear victor in terms of utility, because it's also, you can logically deduce, in my opinion, that it is able to supersede and basically persevere longer than minarchy, because it doesn't skip the fundamental steps. It doesn't skip right to the degrading of the society. And I think that's also evidence through history. But because of this, I do hold to the position that anarchy is superior to minarchy in both utilitarian ideals and in moral ideals, in the fact that it is the moral extension of liberty. It is the only moral extension of liberty that is available. So I think, I believe it to be the only objective, basically, extension of libertarianism. So that's my introduction.
All right, that's right at 2 minutes and 14 seconds. All right, Cafe, would you like to go ahead and do your introduction?
Absolutely. All right. I'd also like to thank Carson for doing this debate. I'm honored to be on the Christian Watson podcast. I really appreciate the sort of setting up of this debate. I'm going to start off with I agree with the definition of anarcho-capitalism, like the economic concept in which all goods and services are provided by the market and the government is abolished in the process or non-existent in the process. I think in this debate, the anarcho-capitalist is going to have to prove a few things, really 3 things. One, they're going to have to prove that all necessary goods can be delivered sufficiently via the market alone. 2, they're going to have to prove that anarchist markets actually assist free markets and don't hinder them. And 3, they're going to have to prove that the privatization off of public services is somehow ethical. If they can prove those three things, then the sort of free market utopia of anarcho-capitalism is morally sufficient to pursue.
Hold on.
Can
Carson kind of, yeah, he went out for a little bit. Sorry, say that again. I'm sorry. I'll rewind the clock. Carson went out for a little bit.
How long was Carson out? Carson, when did you stop hearing me? Audio's out too?
I guess so. Carson? Okay, hold on.
I'll take a water break until this is resolved, you know.
Meanwhile, if you guys are here and you're liking the show so far, the few minutes that it's been on, the 6 minutes it's been on, please smash that like button, please. Let me know that you're listening in the chat over here, and please say anything that would give me a sign that there's a semblance of life out there.
Hello.
Yes, hello.
Carson, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
All right, let me. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry about that. My internet cut out for a second.
Awesome.
Okay.
Maybe I should start from the beginning then. Is that okay?
Yes.
Would that
I'll run the yeah.
Awesome.
Sorry about that.
All right. I'll start the clock in a moment. Whenever you're done, ready, Cafe.
Sure.
Your move.
All right, so I'll begin. Starting once again, I'd like to thank Carson and Christian for organizing this debate. I'm sure it's going to be lots of fun. I haven't actually professionally or vernacularly debated this concept before, so I'm excited. So, anyways, I agree with the definition of anarcho-capitalism. I think the anarcho-capitalist, Carson, in this debate has to prove three things in order to be correct. One, they have to prove that all necessary goods can be delivered sufficiently via the market alone. Two, they have to prove that anarchist markets actually assist free markets and don't hinder them. And three, that the profitization off of public services is ethical. If they can prove all three of those things, then I think that they win the argument and they convince me. So the first contention, that all necessary goods must be delivered sufficiently via the market. I think this can more elaborately be summarized as this. Like, anarcho-capitalism assumes that there are incentives for businesses to provide every single good that is currently in existence or future goods. But this ignores things like price inelasticity and natural malinvestment, which actually there's lots of evidence to prove actually exists. So for example, you will have banks malinvest in firms in a free market under what the under what the correct market price should be or above what the correct market price should be. So even with a free market, equilibrium is not met. Contention number two, that the anarchist markets have to assist free markets and not hinder them. We see evidence for this in asymmetric information, such as disclosure laws and insurance, for example. And contention three, that the profitization off of public services is ethical. Is it ethical to profit off of public services? Rothbard says yes. I don't think that it is. We can see an example from this in the justice system. Whenever judges have to take an oath to protect all people and to protect their rights, they're not serving a particular client. There's no profit motive for them, but they have to serve all clients equally because they're not actually clients. They are citizens under the law, and that can only happen with a governmental body and not with a private institution. If I'm being unclear about anything, please let me know, but that's overall my basic case against anarcho-capitalism.
Alrighty, well, that's about 2 minutes there. All right, guys. Well, now is the open discussion period, which will go on for about 20 minutes, unless you guys determine that it needs to go on for longer. And feel free to respond to anything either person said during the course of this of their opening introductory remarks. All I ask that you guys keep it civil and you keep it, lighthearted a little bit. All right, go ahead.
Awesome. So, can I start off here for a second?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So I'm curious. Are you arguing, I would say, I guess, from a utilitarian perspective for libertarianism? Because from how it sounds, you are, since you assume, basically you make the case that all goods might not be able to be delivered under an anarcho-capitalist market, which to me assumes basically it puts aside the morality of it to look into the So basically, I'm just trying to be clear. Are you arguing from a moral perspective or a purely utilitarian perspective?
I say that my first few contentions are utilitarian, and then I end it with a moral case, even if those utilitarian cases fail. Like, I meant to ask you about this, but like I didn't want to respond to your comments before you got the chance that anarchy fulfills libertarian principles.
Yes.
But you didn't explain why libertarianism, like whether or not it's morally complete or not. I think libertarianism by itself, where it's just freedom of the market alone, that is a morally incomplete idea. So you didn't explain how that was like a morally complete thing in the first place, like why that should be the goalpost.
I think because it's it's literally the only manifestation, I guess, the only intrinsic universal manifestation, basically, of moral principles, which is liberty, and liberty through that manifests property. Those are the only two, basically, moral manifestations within this universe.
Why?
Because you can't logically deduce any others. Those two you can deduce. No other principles are manifested. No other, basically.
Sorry to interrupt you. Can you finish?
Yeah.
All right.
That's it.
Sure. I'm just wondering, what's your basis for saying that liberty is somehow the only one that's logically deduced? Like, are you citing any sort of social contract theory, or is like liberty the only public virtue that we actually have? Like, I'm confused about this.
It's essentially the idea that liberty basically is provable through basically, so it stems from truth. It goes truth, then it goes liberty, then it goes property. Liberty being essentially a manifestation of truth through consciousness, in that a conscious actor cannot deny liberty in their attempt to argue against it.
Yes, but couldn't you also use that same exact logic, like truth creates morality, to say that coercion can create morally greater outcomes even at the cost of things like freedom? And so can't that lead to a sort of slippery slope fallacy? Like, so for example, if I say that the truth is that families are important, therefore we should force everybody to have a 4-person family, right? Well, you achieved a virtuous goal, which is that families are preserved and people are having more families, but you had the cost of freedom, right? So how do you prove that one value, being freedom, is inherently more important than other private virtues or public virtues?
Because there is no contradiction within it. If you force people to essentially, I would say, have let's say a family, right? That's a contradiction to a higher principle which stems from truth. Liberty is one of the basically fundamental branches of truth and logic. In the fact that it is uncontradictable. It is basically, you cannot contradict liberty without at the same point and the same time basically denying your own liberty in that sense.
But I'm not sure that you've proved that, though, because all you said was that liberty is uncontradictable, even though I just proved a contradiction that could come within that. So, for example, you could say that there's a virtue that needs to be preserved. You take away people's freedoms in order to preserve that virtue, and virtue has been established, but at the cost of freedom. That's a contradiction. I think that needs to be addressed in order for your case to be complete, though.
But that's not a liberty. That's not a contradiction of liberty. It's a contradiction of what you want, but what you want should not affect other people's liberty at all.
Right, but can't liberty create bad outcomes? So if I have let's say, like, I know that there's supposed to be private security and all in a sort of ANCAP situation, but let's go to the logical extreme. Let's say it's illegal to kill people, right? Sure. That would be a liberty. It violates the non-aggression principle.
Because that's not the definition of liberty. So that's not the logical conclusion of anarcho-capitalism.
Is it because it's in violation of like social contract and like non-aggression, right?
No. It's in violation of liberty itself.
Oh, okay. Explain.
Liberty itself cannot. So, okay, logical principles, right? Logical principles and truth are the fundamental, basically, causations of everything. Everything is established off of logic and truth. Those are basically interchangeable, I guess you could say, at this point.
Right.
Now, a rule of logic, an intrinsic rule of logic within the universe, is the law of non-contradiction, which states that basically A equals B and A does not equal B cannot be true at the same time.
Right.
If you say I have liberty to kill you, you are essentially you are creating a contradiction within your I guess you could say libertarian basically standpoint, within your deduction of liberty itself. It basically works. So let's say I like to refer to it personally as bubble ethics, which is that each person has a bubble of their own liberty. But as soon as that liberty contradicts another person's basically liberty of, I guess you could say, actions, that liberty is therefore invalidated.
Right. And I think this goes back to the sort of first two contentions that I made, which sort of violate liberty in a free market system, right? So, for example, you didn't address the asymmetric information paradox, which happens in a free market. So that actually limits people's liberty through anarcho-capitalism. So, like, what happens whenever anarcho-capitalism causes someone to lose liberty and not gain it? What do you say to that?
So what's the example specifically?
So the citation that let's see, I have two here. I'm trying to decide which citation I should use. I guess I should use the disclosure laws and fire insurance, which is the one I have linked here. Let me pull it up for you.
Okay.
Just a second. Yep. Okay, let me go to the exact spot in this. It's actually a lesson plan from UC Berkeley in their econ department. But essentially talks about moral hazards and about how whenever you buy into certain types of private insurance, you have incentives to actually like leave the insurance because it becomes too expensive because of like a lack of proper disclosure between the two parties. I think here it is. Here we are. Okay, so the market outcome. Insurance companies realize that homeowners will exert less effort when they're more insured, and so they charge higher prices. So the more of a service you're getting, right?
Yeah.
The higher the price you're going to get, right? Except insurance doesn't really work that way. Insurance is a pool that covers potential future losses, right? Or potential future hazards, right? As a result, homeowners will choose to not be fully insured because that's not in their best interest as consumers. With partial insurance, the benefit to homeowners from fire prevention efforts is less than the true benefit. So actually, we see that the market is not creating a perfect efficiency here. It's creating a dead weight loss. It's less than efficient and it's less than beneficial for the consumer, right?
I would be, if I may interject there real quick. I would be curious where basically the beneficiality for the consumer basically in this basically concept stems, because under no market should basically the benefit of something to the consumer matter, only if their liberty is violated or not. And I think that would be my question, I think, for you on this point is, do you believe that property rights, or do you believe in liberty, and then do you believe in property? Because I'll leave the question there for you.
All right, if you believe in liberty and property, you should believe in disclosure laws by the government because those protect liberty and property. Whenever I pay for something, I expect to get what I paid for. Disclosure laws ensure that that's happening. They ensure the free market.
Disclosure laws don't have to be government manifested, though.
No, but I showed you an example in which insurance companies actually offer less for more, or they create incentives for people to drop out of their insurance pool and not be covered. That's not an example of me having full disclosure to the information I need as a consumer to buy what I want or to buy what I need.
I think it is.
Market, you need to have symmetrical information.
No. You don't need to have information. You need to have a contractual accuracy.
Which can only happen with symmetrical information.
What do you mean symmetrical information? Like, if your company creates basically an incentive for me to drop out of that company, and I drop out of it, or let's say I just as a customer don't get insurance, and that harms me in the end. I don't see. I might be missing your point here, but I don't see basically any violation of liberty there. I think the only violation of liberty would be if the contract is intentionally basically just a violation, like if there was a lie within it. And if you're saying that's the case, that isn't permitted under anarcho-capitalism either.
So, but an inevitable consequence of liberty is knowing what you're going to consume and what you're going to get out of it. And also having that thing that you paid for, right? So disclosure laws, all they try to do is step in and say, no, if someone paid for this, they deserve to know every single amount of dollar that they're getting. I'm not sure if I'm properly representing the fire insurance case anymore, but it doesn't really matter because there's cases like this all over where the consumer will have more knowledge about what they're selling than the person buying. That is not a free market transaction because then the consumer can lie about how much they're trying to sell and what they're trying to sell at the expense.
Sure.
Sorry. The producer can do that at the expense of the consumer. That's not a free market transaction.
Oh, of course not. That's not permitted under anarcho-capitalism, though. I mean,
it is.
How? In what way?
The mechanism that stops it.
ROIs.
What are ROIs?
ROIs are essentially rights enforcement agencies. So here's I think I want to get real quick, if I may, I want to get into a quick question for you.
Sure.
how do you define government?
The government are the people that we as taxpayers pay to protect our rights.
That's all.
Yes.
Now,
That's why
do
I'm
you
a
think it should be
minarchist, yeah.
mandatory to pay taxes?
I've heard cases for a voluntary tax, which I think are interested. My mind is unmade
No.
up, so I'll stick with the default of a sort
No.
of mandatory tax.
Okay,
Yeah.
so here's the question. If there's a voluntary tax, that is anarcho-capitalism. That is not government. That is anarcho-capitalist.
Possibly, but it depends on what privileges are given to the body of power that that is taxing you, right?
Okay,
Even
so,
if it's a voluntary tax, right? If
so
that
do you
body
think
is
that?
given higher privileges, if it's given more privileges, then that is a government entity.
Okay,
It has
yeah.
more
Do you
privileges.
think so? Do you think the government should be able to violate the rights of its citizens?
At the so
By
so
that I mean
sure.
taxes. I mean, let's say pretty much everything. Like, let's say I guess you could say
So
tags on cars, stuff like that. Do you think
a tax is not a violation of rights. I don't think you're delineating.
It clearly
between
is.
these
It clearly
things.
is.
No, wait. Hold on. I don't think you're delineating between these things. This is where the idea of public goods come in. Do you know the difference between a public good and a market
There's
entity?
no difference.
Like,
There's no difference.
difference between a public good and like something that's sold on the market?
There's no difference.
Really? So
No.
there's no difference between something in which private firms have an incentive to compete for and sell versus a non-rivalrous common good?
Private firms have an incentive to compete for those as well. The problem, I think,
No.
Hold on a second. The problem we're running into here is I want a concrete definition of a public good. So when I say that, I want a concrete definition where we can apply it only to public goods, only to what we call public goods currently, and to nothing else. And that definition does not exist.
Sure. Are you aware of Stephen Michael Davis?
No, I'm not.
Okay, really good libertarian YouTube channel. I think you should check him out. But he talks about how whenever you run into issues regarding the like public good delineation versus like what is a like market sold good, you run into the free rider problem actually, which is like very interesting. But essentially, there's no incentive for firms to go into certain kinds of industry, right? And so we call those public goods. Now, those public goods, now as a conservative, I believe that maybe they should be localized or non-federal or like non-nationwide, right? Keep them decentralized. That's what Hayek talks about. But there's no incentive for like a firm to come up and say, hey, let's just educate people.
Why
it's
not?
like, well, maybe for college like degrees or certificates that have value in which those loans can be paid back, but there's no like just raw incentive for people to just come out and say, hey, let's educate people just because we feel like it, right? That's a common good, and so that has to be paid for through local taxpayer dollars. We can talk about whether or not that can be a forced tax or a voluntary tax.
But let's talk about if it actually has to be paid for by taxpayer dollars at all. I mean, homeschooling has like taken over the market. Homeschooling is entirely voluntary. Now, aside from that, there are a lot of private schools as well. So I think your point there is just null. It's like just verifiably wrong.
So you do realize that private schools and public schools are selling different goods because one is a public common good and one's not, right?
Okay,
it's sort of like the difference between hold on. It's sort of like the difference between selling birthday cakes and selling like essential food items like beans and water and milk. Like do you understand?
No, because they're fundamentally the same thing. You're getting education. Are you saying people deserve education? Is that what you're saying?
You can't survive off of a birthday cake. A birthday cake is something you pay extra for because it's an unnecessary like sweet thing, right? And so private education, there's more amenities to paying for private education. So there's separate markets. They're trying to cater to separate people. One is treated as a public common good. The other one is treated as a market entity or a market.
They're treated differently,
product.
but they're virtually the same.
No, they're sort of offering the same thing in the umbrella of education.
They're
but
offering
different goods to different markets. Like one of them is offering to like wealthy suburban kids who can afford or who can compete to like see which people to see which providers offer the best and most affordable and highest quality education. And the other one is like, okay, society needs to be educated. So we're going to put in this monopsony and this baseline, right? It's sort of like the postal service, right?
I mean, well, first of all, I mean, homeschooling is actually way cheaper than a public schooling. Like it's verifiably cheaper. So I don't see how it's serving like different markets at all. I think, and also another, I really want to get back into this this public good discussion of, do you believe that public goods basically, we have basically, I guess you could say, Do you think people deserve education? Do you think that is an inalienable human right? And how do you prove that?
No. You're confusing public goods with human rights. A right is something that you're born with that cannot be taken away. A
Yeah.
public
So
good is something that the market has no incentive to provide, but that
so was I
everybody
born with
benefits
liberty?
from
Was I
at
born
a
with
local
liberty?
level.
Was I born with liberty? Was I born with liberty?
Yes, you were born with
So
liberty
then
as well.
why do people get to violate my liberty in order to provide public goods which are lesser than my right?
So again, there's a difference between, we can talk about voluntary versus involuntary taxation. I think that's a very good conversation, but that's ultimately not, like, a government is not just an entity that taxes. It gets its revenue through taxes, but a government is a privileged body that is able to occasionally violate rights in the name of the law, right?
The law is established from rights. It
without.
should be established from rights, though. The law has no meaning to anything.
Wait, are you kidding me? There can be no freedom without the law.
No, no, okay. There are freedom is established from rights. The law is made up by governmental bodies.
So how do you know what is right and wrong without justice?
Because it's logically established. It's logically established.
Without justice, for example. Isn't justice an offshoot of liberty?
What do you mean by justice? Like, I'm confused.
So let's say we're in a confusing sort of conflict with regard to our private property rights. We don't know who violated who. We have to take it to a court. Yeah. Is the court going to respond to the highest bidder or to the client, or are they going to respond to whoever is in the right based off the Constitution and the law of the land?
They're going to respond to whoever's right, and they're going to do that only under an anarcho-capitalist society.
Why? What's the incentive?
Because if you have a business, let's say you have McDonald's, right?
Right.
And then every time basically a poor person goes to buy at McDonald's, they take a bunch of poop, horse manure, and they stuff it in the burger and they feed it to the poor person. McDonald's is going out of business. A business is based off of its reputation, and reputation will ensure that these businesses perform at a standard level, basically, and at a fair level. If a business does not have good reputation, people will not agree to be arbitrated by that business. Now, for government, on the other hand, government does not have to do that. Government has no incentive to do anything because government can violate rights whenever and however it wants. Once again, and we can get into the tax, the voluntary versus involuntary taxes, but I feel like you're arguing for tacit consent here.
I don't know what that last part meant, that very last part, but I have three responses. I'm trying to prioritize them in my head. Okay, so the example you used was bad because there was a social cost immediately without the prerequisite of a legal social cost that was inevitable, if you understand what I'm saying. So the way that suing law, like, I think it's called tort law, but I'm not sure. I don't want to mix up the jargon because I'm not a lawyer, right? But the way that, like, the law works is the law works often in tandem with the market. So, like, let's say McDonald's does serve you poop. Well, they already don't. So you're saying that they don't have a market incentive to do so just because people would stop eating there.
Yes.
Well, we already have a similar sort of incentive with regard to the judicial system. So we have lawsuits. Lawsuits work in tandem with the market in a very similar way. Would you want to abolish lawsuits just so that there could be an immediate social cost of people, for example, stuffing poop in burgers? Or would you rather that not happen because of the risk of lawsuits, right? So lawsuits are preemptive risk. I'm saying that whenever the market reacts to something, it is a sort of post-episodic risk, like the thing has already happened. So there's a greater social cost. So under anarcho-capitalism, there's a greater social cost with your example.
Why does that matter?
Huh?
Why does the social cost matter?
Because that's morality. Higher social cost equals like worse morality. Yeah.
So you're arguing from a utilitarian perspective, is what you're saying. Well,
here utilitarianism is not segregated from morality. They can be intertwined.
No. Hold on. If you hold on. If you violate liberty,
all right, guys, don't speaking over each other. Okay, one at a time. It's all right. Well, we're all right. We're in the Zen right now. It's okay. It's all right. It's all right. All right. So one at a time. Okay.
All right. If you violate liberty in order to basically serve utilitarianism, it seems to me that you're putting utilitarianism at a higher level, at a higher basically point on your basically list of values than libertarianism.
All right, so I think the issue here is utilitarianism is not always morally segregated from things like liberty or virtue or what is right. So for example, this is what the trolley problem is all about. The trolley problem is not a utilitarian problem purely. It's about how much morality do you want to preserve in the end, right? It's not just about what's most efficient. It's about what is like prioritizing one morality over the other. So for example, if someone has to kill someone in self-defense, that was a utilitarian and but like also morally costly decision, right? And so like morals and utility, like morality and morality and utility conflict and intertwine frequently. So it's not treating them as separate issues, I think, is the problem, right? So
right,
if I
cool.
want to say that it is more utilitarian and moral for there to just be lawsuits to prevent the act from occurring in the first place, rather than waiting for the market to react to what McDonald's did at the cost of giving someone sepsis, then that's probably the most moral outcome. Is that fair?
Okay.
Okay.
I will give Carson the last word on this because we are about a minute over the 20-minute time frame for this. But Carson, you have the last word.
All right. I guess I'll just wrap up. I think that basically government is, I think, inherently a violation of liberty, and I think anything that violates liberty is entirely subjective, entirely utilitarianism, and I think it reveals a higher value of utilitarian principles than libertarian principles. And I would say, essentially, my last closing remark is that I think, obviously, anarcho-capitalism can serve it better. But
All right, gentlemen, that was a good back and forth. Very, very enlightening. So it is my turn to ask questions. Excuse me, and again, I have no questions prepared. So these are just off the top of my head. Excuse me about that. I didn't know. But all is well in the kingdom. Alrighty, my first question is for Cafe. So, do you describe yourself as a minarchist?
I'm a conservative minarchist, so I believe if the state is going
What does that mean?
if the state is going to intervene, it has to do it via an originalist, statewide, localized form of democratically elected representative officials who do as little as they can to intervene to preserve the maximum amount of virtue. It's basically just a vanilla conservative way of looking at things.
You said a lot of stuff. So you said a localized, democratically elected body of. So what are the features of and you mentioned virtue as well, as in they should only intervene as a way to, you said, preserve virtue?
Yes, that would include preserving liberty, by the way, if somebody's rights are being violated. But liberty is not the only right. We also have the right to life. Now, I think Carson would argue like those things are intertwined, because if you're not alive, you can't practice liberty. But we can get into that some other time.
Let's stay here. So is virtue why is a minarchist government inherently concerned with virtue?
I think any government tries to be concerned with virtue. The question is, they overstep, because that's why we have democratically elected officials, because if we didn't do that, we wouldn't think that anything was wrong, right? This is the reason why we elect charismatic leaders and end up with dictatorships. Yeah.
So you think that if people didn't have a politician telling them what to do, they wouldn't know right from wrong?
No, I think that's a bit of a straw man. I think the issue is I think that people do know right from wrong, but some people don't. And I think that's the purpose of things like the justice system, which doesn't obey clients. That was my main point that wasn't really responded to. The justice system doesn't obey clients. It obeys the rule of law. And the rule of law is universally afflicted on all people, so that everyone is held to the same standard. Under an capitalist society, there would be no equivalent standard of among all courts.
So for you, the minarchist government is concerned with virtue, and it's also concerned with giving a model of what is right and wrong through the elected leaders of that government, correct?
A very, very basic model. I think a lot of the holes in the model can be filled by things like, churches and things like support groups. Obviously, that's the conservative aspect of me. I don't want the government to drill everybody on every moral thing ever. But I think it's a good question. I think there might be some. There might be a level of incompleteness with my understanding of where to draw the line, but I do think that there is a moral imprimatur bequeathed upon the minarchist project, in your opinion. Oh yeah, it's a very moral project. Yeah. There's an aspect of modeling morality and modeling virtue, correct? In your version of the minarchist project. I'm not sure what the question is trying to entail here. What does that mean? I'm not trying to entail anything. I'm just trying to see, because I think this is very important to establish the dimensions between anarchism and minarchy. Sure, but like, what does the question mean?
So you believe that the government should model, even in a very basic way, in your words, a kind of basic idea of virtue for its citizens.
Yes, yes, one that's
Okay.
based on the constitutional rights. Yeah, yep.
Okay. Okay. I get it. All right, Carson. There's a question of accountability. There's a question of your face, man. There's a question of accountability, right?
Yes.
That I don't understand when it comes to the anarchist position.
Yes.
You seem, and a lot of anarchists seem, to invest accountability into abstractions. What do I mean by that? So the anarchists, what they'll do, they'll imagine a world in which the government does not exist. And they'll imagine a world in which people are motivated entirely by self-interest, or mostly by self-interest. And then in that world, they'll imagine that everyone will have the same interest in protecting everyone else's stuff or respecting everyone else's boundaries. And then in that abstraction, it goes a little bit further. They'll imagine that this benevolent corrective mechanism of the social control or of the social power, of the social influence, will be enough to ward off bad behavior or correct bad behavior without some sort of centralized power, i.e. a state, being there to facilitate such a transaction. But buried beneath all of these assumptions is the presumption of benevolence on the part of humanity. So how do we account? You've explained to me how in the abstraction of anarchism we can account for certain wrongs or certain inefficiencies, like McDonald's selling horse manure. How can we account for the imperfections of the individual, which sometimes bleed over the prior commitments and contractual obligations that have fastened and forged a sense of cooperation and benevolence? Well, in other words, what do we do when the benevolence entailed by the anarcho-capitalist state fails and falters? Because it ultimately will, and we can empirically verify that it has throughout history.
Well, let me start off by saying I'm not entirely sure what you mean by benevolence of the anarcho-capitalist state. I don't think I think that's a common misunderstanding of anarcho-capitalism. Is people believe it's I guess you could say an unrealistic worldview.
But I didn't say unrealistic.
Yeah,
I
know.
Unrealistic.
Okay, I won't. I won't.
I didn't say unrealistic.
I think that is a common misconception, even if you didn't say that. But I think what people misconceive is that they view it as somehow inherently different from government, aside from just coercion. The purest, the easiest way for me to describe an anarcho-capitalism is government without coercion. And I didn't get into this in the debate, but I'm really interested in definition of government versus definition of, let's say, business, or definition of corporation, or definition of any other or bandit. For this, yes.
So you just define anarcho-capitalism as government without coercion.
Yes.
Okay. Well, you use the word government singularly, which seems to imply that there is a sort of totalizing, centralized force. Now, that's probably not what you meant.
No, not.
But also, for most individuals, they deduce from the word anarchism, and I'm sure many anarchist thinkers like Rothbard would agree with this, the absence of a centralized force. And that means, right, so there's not necessarily implied in the idea of anarcho-capitalism a government or a structural government, is there?
Not necessarily, but it really goes back to, I guess, the definition of the government or state. Because the definition, at least I operate under, and I think this is the only coherent definition, is that state is essentially the set of authoritarian notions manifested by a given authoritarian or a group of authoritarians. If, for example, if I have just real quick,
please,
I'll wrap up. Sorry. Okay, if I have a minarchist state and I tax people, that is an authoritarian rule. That is an authoritarian rule. Now, as soon as for example, I know there are some minarchists I have talked to who want to create a purely night watchman state with no taxes, no nothing but the enforcement of the NAP. And if those minarchists were to succeed, that would be acceptable under an anarcho-capitalistic society, because it's not the only basically distinction for me between anarcho-capitalism and minarchism is if there is coercion applied in the existence of the state. For example, I can set up a state and I can go around, let's say there's a murderer and I go kill them. Does that make me a state? No. All I'm doing is enforcing the NAP. However, as soon as I begin to enforce coercion or authoritarian regimes, essentially, or authoritarian ideas, that is the foundation in my viewpoint of a state. I don't view any basically distinction. I don't think I would go as far as to say I don't see a distinction for a state aside from that definition.
Okay, so you define the state as a organization ran by authoritarians and founded upon authoritarian precepts, correct?
Yes.
So if I could demonstrate to you an organization that was not ran by authoritarians and was not founded by authoritarian precepts, but had but was founded on sort of divine precepts that confirm human freedom, and the people in them are also non-authoritarians, but they still have a monopoly on force, would I then escape your definition of what a state is?
Well, I think the important thing, right, on that point is your definition of a state coercion. If you claim to have a monopoly on force, that's by default coercion, because I should be able to use force to, well, number one, protect myself, but number two, basically justly defend myself through the NAP. I should be able to manifest the NAP through my own abilities. And if you have a monopoly on that, that is by default coercion. That is by default authoritarianism, at least from my viewpoint.
Interesting. Cafe, your turn to get in the hot seat again. Thank you, Carson.
All right.
So what ethical foundation is the Minarchist project predicated upon, in your opinion?
What ethical foundation is the Minarchist project predicated on? It's the rule of law. And so the rule of law can be defined as the social contract in which people's rights are inevitably protected by a body with coercive power, using that coercive power in a last result in order to protect people's inalienable rights.
And so where does the rule of law come from?
The rule of law is divine.
Where does it derive its legitimacy from?
It's divine. I mean, that's certainly the deistic foundation of the Constitution would be an example of that. There are some monarchist sort of states way back in the day that would use like divine rule, for example, but that's a little bit too authoritarian. So I would just go with the U.S. Constitution as an example historically of like divine rule, where it's like more like just our rights are derived from God, right?
So you believe that the origins of the rule of law are rooted with God or in God?
Yes, so something called imago Dei, which means made in God's image. The reason why we recognize other human beings as having worth is because we recognize their godliness, and so we respect that, and we create certain privileges upon a particular group in order to protect those inherent inalienable rights.
So your understanding of the rule of law is entirely rooted in the presumption that a deity exists. Is it rooted in anything more stable than that? As a person,
let's say you're an atheist. You could use a socialization argument to say that since the human person is socially recognizable, anyone socially recognizable as a human person is protected. Since that would be just.
Well, I don't want to hear a random argument. I want to hear what the Minarchist project and your understanding accounts for.
Well,
so how do you account for this?
I'm sort of imitating the argument that a non-believer would say in response to your question, which is that whatever is socially recognizable as a human person, or maybe even scientifically as such, you could do a scientific reductionist argument, but I don't believe in scientism, for example. But there's all sorts of ways to come to the conclusion that other people are humans and therefore are not made in an image, but have inalienable rights.
And I think the two ways you mentioned, both scientism and the socialization argument, don't require a God and would kind of undermine your definition, your basis for the rule of law.
How so?
Well, I'm not trying to debate you, but I just think that I just think that if you believe the rule of law comes from God, and you believe there are secular ways of justifying it,
Sure.
why have the God?
Oh, the fact that the secular ways of justifying it are an afterthought tells you everything that you need to know.
Oh, they're an afterthought to you.
Well, yeah, I would say that they're an afterthought even to the founding fathers who
I
were
suspected as
deistic,
much.
right? Yeah. Huh?
Yeah. All right. Interesting. Carson, your turn. All right. So, how exactly do you enforce things under an anarchist system? Because what you're doing is you're relying on the dependability of enforcement agencies that are not linked together by some network of power, by some centralized authority,
Precisely.
and that can cause issues.
I would say the way you enforce things is exactly in the way that a government would enforce things, but minus coercion. And I like to return to that definition. I really do, because it's the thing is, right? I feel like a lot of people think that an anarchist has to, prove that their society would work. But what I say is, no. I just don't accept coercion in any factor of any area of any basically manifestation of society. Now, if coercion does not exist, I will accept basically that manifestation no matter how it exists. If, for example, if once again, let's say now the overarching concept for anarcho-capitalism is. The overarching concept is the NAP, or is liberty, and obviously you would hope everyone operating under that system understands that. Now, if they don't understand that, I guess it's similar to how if a government is convoluted, then the principles can change. But I don't think there are. Essentially, my argument would be there aren't any problems under anarcho-capitalism that do not also simultaneously exist under statism, but with the addition of coercion.
So, without a coercive mechanism, how exactly? And I'll let you respond, Cafe. Without the coercive mechanism, how exactly, again, do you account for the externalities of having these disjointed agencies that have, again, no centralized accountability and are presumably guided by the interests of their funders, which may not necessarily be the interest of justice? How do you account for these potential divergences?
It's essentially I would say it's a recognition that no system will fully account for those divergences. Take multiple government incidents. I wouldn't say it's a limitations. No, I guess you could say it's a limitation in the fact that it's not a utopia because everyone is human, and I don't think anyone in their right mind wouldn't claim that a utopia is possible. But it's an argument that says government has the same limitations, but worse. For example, once again, government is centralized. This is why we see the degrading of society as a whole instead of the degrading of decentralized aspects of it. Now, it's kind of like, I don't know if you're familiar with how Bitcoin works, but it's kind of like a blockchain of NAP enforcement. At least that's how I think it would logically manifest, is just by the fact that if you have this society, right? If obviously there will be slip-ups, no one's going to, lie to them. At least I hope no one's lying to themselves and saying it's going to be a utopia because humans are imperfect.
That's where the limitation appears to be. A lot of this seems to be predicated upon hope.
Not necessarily. No, not at all. No.
How are you sure these enforcement agencies and people who staff them will be guided by benevolent interests?
How are you sure government will? That's what I'm saying. That's my argument, is that it's the same. You have the same problems.
Respond to this?
1 second.
Yeah.
I think just as a matter of logic, you can prove the inefficiency of one mechanism does not necessarily provide for the efficiency of the other mechanism. So we could have a world in which government does not provide for the conveyance of a benevolent interest, and a world where the anarchist system also does not provide that conveyance of interest as well. he who says A must also say B. So no, I'm not trying to argue either way. I'm just trying to see if this is a defect in the anarchist project.
I don't think it's a default effect at all. It's a recognition that people are humans. Humans make mistakes, and that anarchy is the easiest way to basically reduce those mistakes as much as possible.
I just want to.
Okay, Cafe, you two can enter into a 3-minute back and forth, and then at the end of that 3 minutes, we will have a call in for the people who are watching to come and talk to us. So you guys engage in 2 minutes, and I'll time it.
Sure. There's two things here, really. One, with regard to the criminal justice system thing, I think the argument that you use, how do you know if the government will be accountable, is the same argument that left-wing anarchists use. They just want to dethrone the current, like, nationwide United States government and replace it in favor of a people-run sort of entity that is able to do the will of the people. Just replace liberty with the will of the people, and you have left-wing anarchism, not right-wing anarchism. And so I think the issue is you're not delineating there. And I think the second issue is that whenever Christian asked you about coercion and what makes a state, he said, what if human beings, regardless of having a state, do such and such quality, such and such quality, and such quality? Like, what makes them different from a state? And you just said that it was coercion. So if coercion is the only defining factor of what makes a state, then, like, isn't it possible to have a coercive state body under an anarcho-capitalist society?
Well, firstly, I didn't say it was coercion. I said it was authoritarianism. But secondly, I think it's possible to have coercion manifest itself in any instance, in any, like, because once again, we're not talking about some utilitarian society, but I think with anarchism, the goal is to remove all coercion. So everyone in anarchism or in anarcho-capitalism is operating under the assumption that NAP and liberty must be enforced. Now, with a state,
what if I want to do something unethical with my own free will? So, like, let's say I want, like, right now, I think the most recent copy of the DSM says that face transplants are unethical, right? And not just because they're, like, nasty, but also because they violate other people's dead bodies, which need to be, like, preserved and protected, because those things are, like, it is a virtuous act to not, like, denigrate people's bodies, right? Or, like, yeah. So would you actually use the state to enforce that virtuous thing, even though it's not harming someone directly who is alive or taking away their right to life?
No.
Okay, so you would let that be legal, right? Okay, so at the moment that you let something less virtuous be more common in your society, aren't you proving that my ideal society is more moral?
No, because your virtues are subjective.
So face transplant virtues are subjective?
Yes.
Is what you're saying? As long as they don't, like, physically assault, like, other people or anything like that?
As long as it does not violate liberty of another person, it is subjective.
Okay, so just keep that in mind, that lots of vile things are permissible under Carson's worldview.
Okay, I'd like to see an example of that. Other than just essentially, basically, because right now all you're doing is shock, an argument from shock value right there.
Not necessarily. I chose a shock value.
It's purely shock value.
All right. We're at 2 minutes. We're a little bit over 2 minutes. But it's probably important to note, my earlier question for you, Cathay, was, is virtue an important part of the minarchist project? And if so, how do you account for that? And you said a basic idea of virtue was, but it appears, since you have a lot of other ideas of what virtue might be, there's more than just a basic idea of virtue that's a part of your conservative minarchist project. So I think that's very important for folks to know if they're going to see, okay, which perspective, anarchy or this conservative minarchism, best satisfies a free society.
You know, it's funny because whenever I'm around ANCAPs, I seem statist, and whenever I'm around fellow conservatives, they think I'm like a libertarian or too obsessed with like freedoms and stuff. And so it's always funny to see that dichotomy. But I do believe that freedom is an essential starting point for enacting lots of virtue within society. I think that whenever it comes to very particular conflicts of interest, like the sort of shock value example that I gave, I think that those are sort of outliers in which the state can step in and like say, like, no, we as a collective entity representing the people say that this is incorrect. correct. Like, it is morally wrong, right? And so like that, but like that's just an outlier case. The vast majority of the time, liberty will prevail and private entities can teach people virtue, right? I just think that with some of these outlier cases and with a few examples like the criminal justice, right, where you take an oath to protect people at your best will and not to have a bias versus like being at the will of the clients or at the mercy of the clients or your profit, right? I think that that's a more virtuous way of looking at society, I would have to say.
Okay. All right. Well, that'll be up for a discussion later. I'm not going to get into that involved in that fight. The relationship between virtue and freedom has been one of the oldest debates in political philosophy. It's very complex. But what is not so complex was what will happen next. So, my friends, let me remove this background. I am going to give you guys an opportunity to come on this stream. Here is the StreamYard link, and to one by one, for first come first serve, ask questions to any of our debaters. Even to me, although I don't think that you really need to ask me questions, but if you want to, you can. I'm not the one debating here. But see, all of you, you'll have at least 3 minutes per each person to ask your question, and they'll respond, and we'll see how things go there. So if you want to call in and ask questions, go ahead. I am ready whenever you guys are, and I assume we'll get quite a few good people coming in and asking questions. So, yes. If any of you want to come in and ask questions, there's the link right there. And after our question period, I will lead us to closing remarks. Something.
How are we doing? You guys good? All right, cool. I didn't mean to get you too fired up, Carson.
No, not at all, not at all.
Cool, awesome, great.
No, I just
awesome.
wanted to make sure, basically I got that in there because I didn't want, that basically being misunderstood, my position on that.
Sure, of course, yeah. All right, cool.
Again, if any of you want to call in, and you guys seem to be a shy bunch, I don't understand that whatsoever. But if any of you have the technological capability or the desire to call in, then please. I'm sitting right here, and I don't bite. Even though my questions may have seemed very harsh, and
they're fine, dude. They're fine. Is this going to be like C-SPAN, where like just the C-SPAN book talk, where like
funny.
People call in and like, question the author and stuff?
I'm more exciting than C-SPAN. I'm way more exciting than, even though I sound like a monotonous toad right now, I'm way more excited than C-SPAN, I promise you. All right, folks aren't coming in yet. But okay, so while we wait for folks to come in, why don't we just do closing remarks? Who wants to start first?
Who went first?
You did, Carson.
Okay, then do you want to close first, or?
Sure, I will. I just want to say that I think there were a lot of questions that went unanswered, and since they went unanswered, I'm not convinced. Again, like Carson had to prove that, one, that all necessary goods can be delivered sufficiently via the market, which is the practical case. Two, that anarchist markets actually assist free markets and not hinder them. That's one of the great contradictions, are things like disclosure laws and asymmetrical information, which was not even talked about very much because he had no response to them, I think. And three, that the profitization off of public services and public goods is somehow ethical. I don't think it's ethical to profit off of the criminal justice system. I think that we should do that because we, as a common good society, common law society, believe that it is the right thing to do regardless of the profit motive. I don't think there was a sufficient response to the public goods idea and like the free rider problem that came as a result of that, like the fact that there's no incentive for people to join up in the marketplace and create those goods because not enough people want to invest in them. There's no incentive, and so like business owners are not going to have an incentive to create things like public schooling, for example. Even though I'm not a fan of the Department of Education, like I still believe in like maybe countywide schooling or like statewide schooling just as a public option for people. So and again, I think that the definition of coercion was shaky because they said that there was like an authoritarian form of coercion, but they never delineated why the authoritarian form of coercion was worse than just people being coercive individually, which could still happen in an ANCAP society. So I think for these reasons, you should vote for the minarchist state, because we do try to preserve as much freedom as possible while also enforcing a minimal amount of virtue and public goods. Okay,
we got our first caller who can wait. Carson, you go ahead.
All right, awesome. I'll close by just saying I think that the utilitarian questions that basically you posed I don't know if I answered those satisfactorily, but I don't think that should be a point of contention in this debate at all. I think that basically the very essence of libertarianism should take that liberty as the highest definition. And I think that every single morality question you posed, I answered, and I completed basically succinctly and objectively, I think, in every single way. Now, I think the question that you didn't answer, though, I think the question which basically you did not basically provide to me a satisfactory answer to, I think it was that I think it seems apparent that you clearly value utilitarianism above utilitarianism and basically an authoritarian state, at least in this debate, above basically the preservation of liberty, in the fact that you're willing to violate that for some of these positions basically you have explained. And I think that the reason why anarcho-capitalism is superior to minarchism is not because of any differences in the fundamental aspects to the state or to the anarcho-capitalist ROI or ROA, which would be the alternative to the state. I think the pure difference, the pure distinct difference, which we have not found a satisfactory, basically, I guess you could say, explanation for the acceptance of this difference from a minarchist. The pure difference is coercion and authoritarianism. And I believe, and that's my ending statement, though. So,
okay, very good, gentlemen. Just so I can tell you guys, I'm not going to pick a winner. That's not Mr. Watson's not doing it. So everyone who's in the chat can do that. I'm not picking a winner. I ain't doing it. So that'll be someone else's cross to bear. But let me just give my comment before I bring in Requi. I'm sorry if I'm getting your name wrong, who is sitting in the backstage. I think both of you did very well. I think both of you argued your case very well. I think part of the problem with this debate, and this is a problem with very many debates, this is a problem that I've had when I'm in debates, is that you two are operating from very different conceptual frameworks. And that's fine, but the problem is those conceptual frameworks have to meet somewhere. And if they don't meet somewhere, and there's not really a lot of overplay or interplay between them, it's kind of hard to weigh them. So if you were asking me to pick someone, which I'm not going to do, by the way, I would have a difficult time just because those two conceptual frameworks were not really being, in my opinion, argued as best as they could be. I think that, Carson, you could have gone a little bit further about the coercion point. You could have kind of explained why it is an existential or epistemic threat to the progression of humans or something of that sort, and why the structure of the government of an ANCAP society would be better for that. Cafe, you could have gone much further with the virtue thing, man. You really could have gone much further with that. I didn't feel as if your answers were satisfactory. So I can't pick a winner. The chat can pick a winner. You know, I myself.
The only winner here is the host.
Don't say that. That's a cliche. No. The real winner is all of you guys.
Well. So I'm a minarchist. I'll just put my biases out there. I'm a minarchist. So, but I was not really convinced by either side. Oof. So that should tell you what I think. So, hey, I wasn't convinced by either of you. I'm sorry. I love both of you, though. All right, so let's add this person to the stream. Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you. Hi, how are you doing?
Okay, I'm doing great. I just wanted to have a question for both the anarchists here. What is stopping somebody
both the
from
anarchists.
Creating a...
Oh. You mean the one anarchist?
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. I wanted to know what is stopping somebody from creating a state within an anarchist society.
I would say what's stopping them is basically the adherence to liberty, and I guess you could say basically rights. Once, for example, a lot. I guess I'll try and keep this succinct, but a common basically argument against anarcho-capitalism is how would it form. Now, I think that argument could be levied against any type of basically system, but once it forms, the adherence to the principles of liberty would prevent a state or a coercive entity from forming. It's similar to how it would prevent bandits from forming, because, like, according to to like anatomy of the state, that is they are essentially basically fundamentally the same basically, I guess you could say, entity, or basically is. It's just authoritarianism. It's authoritarianism manifested in different forms. So it would be essentially prevented in the same way that every other crime would be prevented, which is through rights enforcement.
Okay, yeah. So you're saying that like through preserving liberty that you would avoid a state coming back to existence.
Precisely.
I'd like to
Okay.
weigh in on that. I'd
Sure.
like to weigh in just by saying that in an ANCAP society, they would create a government because governments are not incompatible with freedom. Whereas, like in the current society, we see people arguing for ANCAPism because they think that liberty is incompatible with the government. In an ANCAP society, you would have people who form a government, ironically, to get rid of the thing that they think is the government and then to abolish it, by it, and then sleepwalk into tyranny. But that's more of a meme. So I just want to keep it to the real argument, which is that since freedom is not incompatible with the state or with like the protection of rights, the government would be like the inevitable logical conclusion of that.
Well, I do want to respond to that. So, if you are creating a government to government to abolish the government, how can you ensure that the government you're creating will be one power?
How would we ensure that the government
Hello?
I'm creating would be allowed? Given what? Given what? It cut out a lot, so I need to hear it again.
Oh, sorry about that.
Sure.
I just wanted to know, like, how would you ensure that, if you're overtaking that? Because generally, like, for example, bureaucracy, it is very hard to remove power once you give people power. So how would you ensure that?
Well, the Constitution has some very clever ways. I'll give SCOTUS as an example. We don't have term limits for SCOTUS, but we do have term limits for people in office, and that way there's no collusion between the SCOTUS and between, for example, Congress or Senate, right? And so, like, whenever you create a government body and you create a Bill of Rights, that Bill of Rights tells you everything that you need to know. That Bill of Rights ensures that there's not going to be things like people wanting to stay in power. This is why Hayek supported the separation of powers. I'm a big fan of Hayek, who Carson might consider a statist. He was probably the most government friendly of the Austrians, but he also believed in the separation of powers and things like having separate term limits and ideas for different people in those separation of powers. So that's one of the ways that you would prevent that from happening.
Okay. And I guess my last question would be to the anarchist. How big do you think an anarchist society should be?
I think it's important to realize, right, that it would be, I guess you could say, any size that it would be. Like, ideally it would encompass everything. Ideally there would be no more coercion, no more, I guess you could say, authoritarianism, no more statism, at least manifested in the world. Having said that, I don't think there's any ideal amount, because it's not a governmental entity in the traditional sense, in the way that it's entirely decentralized in like every aspect.
So could a anarchist society be global then?
It could theoretically be global, yes.
Well, that's all the questions I have. It was fun talking with all of you.
Yeah, nice to talk to you too.
Oh, thank you
Have a
very
great
much
night.
for coming on, and thank you for watching. I appreciate it, man.
No
But-
problem. Have a nice day.
All right, let's go one more. Let's do one or two more.
Yeah,
Depending on-
I'm good for a few more actually, as long as they don't like take a super long time each. But yeah, I'm good for a few more. Yeah.
You know, let's do a few more of them, depending on if there's interest, because these people seem to be very shy for some reason. I don't know why. That's kind of a. I'm not shy. Well, I guess I'm not. I'm not everyone else, am I? So I don't know. But yes. Okay. Anyway, as I was mentioning before we began the call-ins, I really think that it's important that when you guys have different conceptual frameworks, they clash a little bit. Ooh, oh, who in the world is this? Okay, let's see what this individual. Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, hi. How you doing?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm doing good, man.
All right. Well,
I'm good.
that's good to hear.
I'm good.
I'm doing pretty good. Sorry, there's a terrible echo here. There you go.
Oh,
I had both in the background.
That's all right. That's all right. So, what's your question?
Yeah. So my question here is: under an anarchist society, how would international trade work, assuming that only one country is anarchist and the rest are still functioning as normal countries?
I think that's a really good question, especially considering that I guess you could say an anarcho. Well, it stems into I guess our like trade laws as it is now, where we're willing to trade with countries so long as they don't pass I guess a certain threshold of liberty violations. The problem, right, that I view, and I actually that's a very very good question, because the problem I view is that threshold isn't entirely subjective. So if like let's say if you have an anarcho-capitalist society, I think the easiest way to do those trades, well, it heavily depends, because it depends I guess on the two schools of I guess anarcho-capitalist thought, which is basically, I mean, if you there are two I guess you could say distinctions here, where if you believe that you should go basically and instill the enforcement of liberty on other countries, then I don't think you would basically be willing to trade to other international countries if they violated liberties, because you would view them basically, you would view that as basically trading with a state. However, if you believe that basically there's a separation and that basically you aren't required to actually go, assist, then you would be willing to trade through those. But I that's a very very good question, because I haven't thought of that one. So
all right, thanks for answering.
Hey, that was very quick. All right. Okay. If any of you want to come on and ask questions, feel free to come on. Be as quick or as long as you want to be, I guess.
Christian, can I throw an idea at you in the filler time between the questions? Maybe just ask us more about our general political ideology and see where like ANCAPism leads, for example, when it comes to like social issues and to like other economic issues, instead of just like
I think we've all demonstrated where it leads, but sure, I can.
Okay, I'm sorry. For this. Yeah.
I can. No. I think we've demonstrated where it leads, but we can go further if you'd like. So, Carson, about the dead bodies thingy. So, okay. So, how are okay?
I'm sorry.
No. It's all right. It's all right. That may be actually reflective of the anarchist position. So how are moral? Okay, what kind of morality exists in an anarchist system, anarcho-capitalist system, beyond the non-aggression principle? Is there some kind of personal virtue or personal morality that instills good taste, that says, hey, this may be a bad thing to do, or this may be an unwise thing to do? Like, what kind of morality exists?
Oh, sure. I mean, like, and once again, this goes back to, if you notice in our current society, people have limits. Everyone has a limit. People, some people, like I know some people who refuse to lie. Now they'll, do that thing, basically lying through a mission. But they refuse to fundamentally lie. I know other people who have no problem with lying. I personally think that basically lying is bad, unless basically in a situation where basically it is required, basically where basically the other person has no place to know, and basically if I basically admit something, if I don't lie, they will have an answer. So I think for me, morality obviously is based on what a human is comfortable with personally. However, I think the way anarcho-capitalism differs is it says that subjective morality, because that's what it is. It's entirely subjective. It says that subjective morality should not be used to enforce laws. I think that's where, all these, like these arguments from shock value come in, and it basically, that's why I'm willing to bite the bullet on that. I would not do that. Now, obviously, a good point is that if that body was the property of the family, basically of the deceased, which it should logically be, then that family can do with it as they wish. However, let's say for some case that wasn't. Let's say that person didn't have any relatives and they just died. Then logically and basically objectively, you have to bite the bullet on that position. Not to say that anyone in an anarcho-capitalist society would be okay, would do that or actively want to do that. It's just to say that their basically subjective morals should never be enforced in an ethical system.
I think that may I respond to this? I think that the issue is whenever you call the desecration of dead bodies a subjective moral value just because liberty is the only virtue that you're trying to preserve, you run into problems. If you don't have other ideas of what virtue is, then the idea of desecration, as long as it doesn't harm someone, is like whoever owns the property. And then also we have questions of why is the dead body treated like property now? Because now the family has property rights over the dead body. That's also an unvirtuous thing. That's also like a pretty wrong, messed up thing. Like human bodies are more than just property. They're like things of value, right? And so like I think part of the issue of this is like a state is not just the people who tax you or who force you to do things. They are the like voice of the collective virtue of the people, right? And I know that the word collective is sort of a buzzword. I don't mean collectivism, but I just mean that if the social contract says that everybody agrees on a basic moral value, that needs to be enforced, even if it's not violating liberty. And one of those things should be like, don't desecrate dead bodies. Like that is a social like statement that the government is making and enforcing. I think that was my main point on that.
And I think I'd respond by first of all saying I don't see how basically a rotting body has any value to anyone, because the consciousness itself is the only thing that added value to that body. When the consciousness is gone, it doesn't. In my opinion, that body holds no more value than a tree. But I think it's
a Cartesian dualistic fallacy. But keep going.
Could you explain what that means? I'm very
so Rene Descartes was like the one who like popularized the mind over body sort of like philosophical idea, which is like that consciousness is what a person make, right? And so I think Christian's trying to get our attention for another question.
Well, there's a caller in here, but I just want to make it very clear. I think Descartes' point was that the mind and the body were distinct properties. I think Carson's point is that the mind and the body are one and the same. When the body goes, the mind goes. That's a very different proposition than Descartes.
Okay, but he did say no. But he did say that consciousness is what gives a body value. No, it's just what animates a body. But that's not the same thing as giving a body value. Like the body.
Why does the body have liberty? If there's a body without consciousness, if there's a dead body, does it have liberty?
Why do we have funerals? Again, liberty is not our
I don't know why we have. I don't know why we have funerals, but does a dead person have liberty?
The question is inherently tied to the answer to your question. So like what I'm trying to get at here is like funerals are basically like showing a dead body because that dead body has inherent value, like especially to the people who were close to the victim or like close to the person who died, right? So like it has inherent value even though it has no rights. That's what I'm trying to say.
But if it has no rights, then why should it matter if it's violated?
If it's violated, because I think your understanding of rights is like liberty, but I have a right to like, even after I die, not have my body be like desecrated, right? So there are like preemptive rights to like, okay, after I'm gone, like please respect me, right? Which is weird because now you get into the idea of, okay, is liberty contingent on the existence of life now? Maybe they are two separate things, right? So I do think it opens a Pandora's box sort of situation, but maybe we can get to the question. But yeah, I just wanted to.
Okay, guys. All right, let's go to our next. Okay, well, actually, I can't add the next person to the stream because their devices are not connected. So, a person who wants to be added to the stream, you have to connect your microphone or your camera before I can add you. So excuse me for that. My apologies. But if you guys want to come onto the stream, please click that link there and you'll be able to talk to us. And again, you can ask, be brief, please. Maybe not as brief as that last guy. Kind of shocked me a little bit, but just be brief and we'll get to you, I promise. In the meantime, if you haven't already, I'm encouraging all of you to please go ahead and join our Discord. And I'm asking you to join the Discord because being in the Discord helps me out. It lets me know that you guys are interested in the message that we have here over at Pensive Politics and Christian Watson. And it also helps me understand what you guys want to see from me as time persists. So please do that if you would like to. And I'm going to post this link in here one time because I'm really going to suggest that you guys come in this chat room and talk to us because it's entertaining and it's fun and it's lively. Anyway, back to YouTube. So this idea of rights existing after someone is long deceased, I want to tease it out a little bit more. So, Cafe, when you say that rights may still exist, or it's conceivable that they may still exist after someone's dead, then how do we establish that to be true?
So, to be frank, I was referring to a very specific right. Clearly, all inalienable rights are not given to deceased humans. For example, deceased humans cannot vote, which is an inalienable right. Deceased humans don't have freedom of speech because they can't talk. Okay, so clearly, it's not an altruistic sort of every constitutional right that applies to living people applies to dead people. But clearly, there is inherent value in the dead body. My main question was not so much about rights. I use the word right vernacularly, but not in its proper sense. What I meant to say was that human beings, our bodies have inherent value. This is why we don't like to commodify the human body, for example. These are arguments against pornography, for example, but that's sort of a separate, very private moral issue that is different. But essentially, you cannot commodify or objectify the human body or desecrate it, even if it's not violating the rights of a living person. There is something off about this. There is something eerie, immoral, right? I would be hesitant to find anybody in the chat or viewing this who thinks that it is okay to desecrate dead bodies, right? And the reason for that is because there's inherent value in them, even if they don't have inalienable rights, right? So it's not just like maybe anarcho-capitalism protects people's rights. Maybe they find a way to have this sort of private government that's like voluntary taxation and all that. But in the end, do they really preserve the most good? Do they really have incentives to, say, protect the desecrated bodies, right? Or is it just liberty that they're after, the liberty of the living, right? That's my main point.
I think if I may be allowed to respond to that real quick. I think as far as I can, hear, it just seems to be once again an argument more from shock value. You say there's value to a body, right? And I would agree, because bodies are scarce. DNA is scarce. A body is a singular entity, which, as far as we know, does not manifest anywhere else within the universe. So I think there's clear value to it. But once again, this goes back to my position of, if someone dies, right, and they leave in their will, I think that, wills, contracts can be continuations after death. Now, if someone writes a will and they specify what they want done with their property, that continuation is fulfilled even in an anarcho-capitalist society. But let's go to an idea of, let's say, someone dying and they have no family and they leave no will, so their property just this is common even in minarchist circles. The idea is that their property then is just basically it goes back to nature to be further homesteaded by the next resident or person who wants that property. So I don't see at that point how there's any basically moral standing or any basically position you can take to say that this body cannot be done with or disposed of how people wish, aside from an entirely subjective one that seems to me to be based off of more like religious and utilitarian ideas than libertarianism.
Okay, so a few things here real quick before. Is the question prepared? No. What, Christian? You're muted. You were muted.
Sorry. We got a caller, my friends. We got a caller.
Okay, can I have 30 seconds? 30 seconds?
Yeah, you can. 30 seconds. Oh, okay.
Okay,
hold on.
I didn't make a utilitarian argument. I said that whenever it comes to certain moral hazards that wouldn't constitute technically as rights regarding liberty, since liberty only applies to living persons, anarcho-capitalism fails. And I was naming an example of which that failure would occur, namely the desecration of human bodies, since human bodies don't have liberty, they don't have action or animation, but they still have dignity. So anarcho-capitalism would fail in that respect. And like that doesn't mean that you have to change your ideology, but it just means that you have to admit it's like, okay, maybe this might be a blind spot in the ideology.
All right. It's 30 seconds. Okay, Carson, I want to give you a chance to respond, but we have to get to this person maybe afterwards, okay?
I'm good. I think I said it before.
Hello?
Hello, guys. How you doing?
How you doing? I'm all right. How are you?
Everybody
What's
can
your
hear me
question?
okay?
Oh, yeah, yes, sir. Of course we can. Of course. How you doing?
I'm great. I'm doing good.
Okay, great.
I just wanted to weigh in on this will and desecration of the body thing. I think it has to do a lot with the free will. We talk a lot about free speech, but not enough about free will. And I think the consciousness has this immutable right to have its will perpetuated and continued after the incarnation in the physical body is done. If you follow me, that's
So
where
you said
I resonate with what he says, regardless, if it's a religious perspective, a materialistic perspective. It's like when you give your organs after you're gone. If it's a choice that you made before you left, that choice has to be respected after you're gone.
so you
But
believe
this
the
thing-
consciousness is not necessarily tied to the body.
I think it's much complicated, much more complicated than that. It's like a social loom that we all we create together. So consciousness is.
So are you? Who are you? In order for me to understand the question, who are you agreeing with here a little bit more? If it's that simple.
I think I'm agreeing more with Café con Leche. I'm sorry, I don't know
Okay,
your name.
cool.
Right.
Cool. Yeah. No, I did that on purpose. No. It's sure. I appreciate it. And you agree because people's will should be respected even after they lose their rights and become deceased, correct?
In certain instances, yes. According
Okay.
to you, like the respect of your physical body after you don't have the free speech anymore to say, hey, don't do that. I don't want you to be doing that.
Right, and I'll let Carson respond to this, but my main point of that was that like anarcho-capitalism is a very like sort of materialistic thing. It's really good with things that the market can provide. I would be in ANCAP today if all morals were tied inherently to the market alone. But there's some morals. And like not all private morals needs to be mandated by the state. The vast majority of them, 99% of them shouldn't. But that outlier case, I think, shows a blind spot in anarcho-capitalism where there's no profit motive. There's no anything in the market that would incentivize people to protect desecrated bodies because no rights are at stake because that person is dead. And there's no profit motive. So where is ANCAPism there? It's nowhere. I think it's I think it's good for it's good for most economics, but there are some blind spots morally, and I think that that's one of them.
And I think to provide, I guess, a bit of clarity right on this question, because when I heard the question, I didn't necessarily disagree with a single thing you said. I think I've stated multiple times in this that I believe that contractually, basically contracts should be carried out. The contracts don't just cease to exist when someone dies. A contract basically it's kind of like, let's say if I toss a rock, if someone tosses a rock through the window of my house and then I die, they still are due to basically, and then let's say my house transfers to someone else contractually, they are still due to basically pay for that that basically, I guess you could say, basically violation of my rights. Now I think where it differs is if there are no contracts, if there is no basically apparent will of the deceased for their body, I don't think, and there is no basically continuation of ownership of their body, I don't think there's any way we should basically be able to assume we know, number one, what that person wanted, but number two, what we should do with that body. I think it goes up to nature. It's no longer homesteaded. There's no like ownership of that body.
If I can just interject something about that, because I think you're right on a lot of points. But it's about the assumption aspect of it. You can't assume things about something that's so fundamental. There has to be a use of free speech while the person is still able to use free speech to make his will, his free will after he's gone and not able anymore to express it, known to others, to family, to friends. That's where the social aspect of this collective consciousness comes into play. That's how we say people that are gone, they keep living through us, because we remember them, because we keep applying the lessons that they taught us.
I like that word. I like the word
Mm.
collective conscience, right? French. I like the word collective conscience that you use because that implies not collective power or collective force, but a collective understanding of objective morality that has no profit motive that needs to be enforced, right? And so these things absolutely exist. Yeah,
Not necessarily objective morality. It still
sure.
can be on the basis of respecting the subjective morality of anyone. If you have someone who's very far out there and likes to do stuff with dead bodies while they're alive, would like some people to
My, oh my.
enjoy doing stuff with his body once he's gone. He can make it known and let the creeps have their fun,
This talk of a collective conscience sounds very Jungian to me. So I'm kind of out of my element a little bit. And for those of you who don't know who Jung is, Carl Jung was a psychologist, contemporary of Sigmund Freud, and he posited he was very big into archetypes and trying to understand themes in various forms of literature, especially Christianity. He loved Christianity through archetypes. He's actually Jordan Peterson's #1 philosophical influence, which is why you hear Peterson talking about dragons and archetypes and mermaids and wizards and all kind of stuff, because Jung was into that weird stuff. But this sounds a lot like Jung, because Jung was talking about the collective unconscious, that we have this sort of shared consciousness from which we draw all of our themes and our life experiences from. And so this to me sounds like a lot like that idea, kind of. Just an observation.
I wouldn't believe it's so implicit as Jung would have believed. I think it's more dependent, contingent on the use of free speech and having clarity in what we think and say, and maybe changing it over time because we're exposed to different influences, but really self-actualizing constantly that collective consciousness through dialogue, through exchanges of ideas, like you're doing right now.
Fascinating stuff, Frenchville. Fascinating stuff, man. You guys have anything to add? This is some fascinating stuff, man. I like this kind of stuff. You're a deep thinker, brother. I like that.
No, I appreciate it, French. It's a very lovely conversation to think about. I'll consider the sort of conundrums that come with it. And I'll see what conclusion I draw. But I appreciate the thought. Yeah.
I'm very happy that I have been able to contribute.
Of course. Thank you, French, and I hope that you continue to remain an active participant in the Pensive community here.
I will. Been following you a while. I'm a big fan, Christian.
Oh, thank you, buddy. I appreciate it, man. Thank you. I'm blessed by that. Thank you, man. All right. You have a nice day, okay?
Bye-bye.
All right, guys. How about one more? One more?
Sounds good to me. I have time.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Guys, this is fascinating stuff. Thank you guys for partaking in this experiment here. I don't do debates on my podcast, but I'm going to do many more. Not with me involved in them. I like being the moderator much better.
Well, you already have plenty of debates under your belt, so you have work to do.
Yeah. Well, okay. Yeah. I got debates all right, and they were stressful as hell. Like that Gothics debate. Love you, Gothics, if you ever watched this. I'm not sure if Vanessa watches my streams, but that debate was messed up. Anyway, excuse me. Okay, I'm monologuing here in the middle of a conversation. I'm bad at this. Okay, guys, if you want to call into us, you want to call into your face, Carson. If you want to call into the stream, please click the link in the chat room. Oh gosh. Okay, click link in the chat room, and we'll be happy to talk to you. I'm not crazy, dude. You look like I'm crazy. I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy.
If there's any lefties in the chat, that might be interesting to hear, like critiques of both sides. From
I would love it. I would love.
How
if
about we double team them?
No, we don't do that. That's deceptive. I would like it if some of you, if any of you are left leaning and you want to talk to any of us or even me. I would be very appreciative of it. So please, come show your love or your hate or your derision or whatever you want to show to me. I mean, we had a left winger in the chat last night talking about how I lived in my mom's basement, which is just an interesting idea. I didn't know that. Apparently, they know more about my living arrangements than I do. I mean, I didn't know that. But if you guys want to come on and talk to us on this stream or ask me questions or grill me or, say, Christian, I hate you, or Christian, I love you, or Christian, you're a confused boy, or Christian, whatever you want to say, please pop on. Okay, he came back. Okay. God. Okay. All right, man. I don't know what's going on today on the stream. What's going on, man?
I'm definitely not as deep of a thinker
Hello,
as
Daniel.
you guys.
Hello
Hey,
again.
How you guys doing?
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Welcome back.
I'm definitely by no means as deep of a thinker. I haven't studied moral philosophy or anything like that to the extent you guys have. So I guess I have a much simpler question that is probably quite easy to answer. But my question is, to what extent do we try to force something upon people that don't want it? Like, for example, there's so few libertarians out there, let alone anarchists and minarchists. Everybody is left or right. They don't care about the other spectrum of up and down. To what extent do we as a small minority try to enforce that, knowing that according to us it is correct and right for everybody to uphold moral value and liberty? To what extent do we force that upon them?
May I answer this first?
Sure.
What? That's sure. I don't like that sure.
No. Sure. Go ahead. Go
All right,
ahead.
cool.
Go ahead.
So look, you said it right there. Liberty and values, right, is what you said. And so, as long as everything that the right has in common is liberty and values, and then we just get rid of the fascists and like whoever like claims to be right that like really shouldn't be or that we don't like, then we should unify under those basic values: liberty and value, right, or liberty and virtue, right? Of course, I would critique NCAPism for not focusing enough on like virtue, and also for not actually maximizing liberty as much as they think, which is like, the issues of both public goods and asymmetric information, which I brought up. But the big point is that we do have things that we unify on. I'm sure that Carson and myself were critical of like a lot of social justice doctrine, and we probably share similar views on certain social issues. For example, I'm sure that we're both very pro free speech. I'm sure that we both believe in private virtue, at least, like you should go to church or like believe in something bigger than yourself, all this important stuff. And these are the things that you like really unify people on the right. And like, this is all from Western civilization. So really just educating yourself in Western civilization, finding out the things that connect all of these different parties together. Okay, we all love like liberty and freedom and like values and virtue, and then like just campaign on those things. And like that's what like I sort of disagree with the question, because the question implies, how can anarchists and minarchists inflict their ideas upon the rest of the right? It's like, no, it's like we need to join up with the rest of the right, and anyone who's unvirtuous is just kicked out, and boom, we have a giant coalition, right? So I think that's how we should view things, if that answers your question.
Yes, that does answer it.
If I can jump in on my perspective on this, I think for me, it's less of an enforcement of ideals, but a lack of enforcement of ideals. For me, it's at least in my view, it's basically the idea that any enforcement of ideals onto basically other parties is coercive in nature. And now, obviously, the common thing is like, well, but if I have a gun, can't I shoot you? The checkmate liberal or the checkmate atheist argument, essentially. But I think the when you realize that liberty only extends to the boundaries, basically where it only extends so far as it does not conflict with other liberties, I think then it becomes a lot easier to realize that basically, let's say basically there are the only thing to enforce necessarily is lack of enforcement. It's a strain. I don't quite know how to phrase that, but it's a concept of basically an enforcement of our ideals not existing beyond that which is basically objective, and to not enforce would be a contradiction.
Okay, no, those both answers are clears up a lot for me. I appreciate that. I have one more minor question, if that's all right, Christian.
Oh, please. No, Daniel, ask me as you like to.
Okay,
as you
awesome. So this one, it's not as much regarding the argument at hand, but rather, do you guys realistically see this political system coming into play ever in Western culture? And if not, then why do we make such a big deal about it? Or not us as a society, but rather you guys specifically. Why do you guys make such a big deal about truth and liberty instead of making the best out of a society that is imperfect?
No, if I could take if I could take this one first.
Oh, go on.
I definitely see, I guess, the manifestation of it coming into play. I think because I don't like if you read up on history, it wasn't that long ago when people didn't even have a concept of self-ownership. They didn't have a concept of liberty. They didn't have a concept of anything. It was just the concept of the king, the concept of the monarch, and that was the base. That was it. It was just it was a remedial concept of rights. And we have made developments in leaps and bounds, over the past, even just 100 years. Over the, we've had new thinkers just basically emerging left, right, and center, who are pushing the boundaries of basically this logical continuity of rights. So I definitely think it'll be manifest. But as to, your question of, basically, if I didn't think it would be manifest, basically, I think what you're trying to ask is, if I didn't think it would be manifest, is there any point in ever pursuing it? And I think that comes down to an individualist viewpoint of it, in the fact that even if I hold no hope for it manifesting ever, it's still objectively, at least in my opinion, the right basically worldview. And because of that, I don't necessarily have a moral obligation to, I guess you could say, basically, like, throw my life on the line for it. I think that could be pushing it, but I do have, if something is objectively morally right, I certainly have an obligation, if I basically am privy to that information, to try my hardest to basically convince others of it. It's similar to, like, Christianity, is if if you're a Christian, right, and you truly believe that Christianity, right, is the one religion, then why wouldn't you, even if you have, let's say, no hope for someone, outside of that religion, why wouldn't you try and, convert them? Why wouldn't you try and go around and basically make people aware of your viewpoint?
So I think a lot of what Carson said is correct. What I also like to say is that I like to visualize this through metaphors. So the metaphor of the shout and the metaphor of fire are the two most powerful metaphors, I think, that have been enshrined in any mythology, any spiritual tradition. And they are two epistemic lenses by which we can understand and appreciate certain concepts. So you ask, if the society is so depraved and is so divergent from this, why not just deal with the circumstances at hand? Well, guess what? Before Prometheus bequeathed upon the human beings the quality of fire, the human beings didn't have the ability to see beyond their own environment. The Bible says that when you shout, the walls tumble down. Now, that can mean many different things. For Christians, that may mean like a literal barrier in their life coming down or whatever. But for me, I interpret that allegorically, that when we raise our voices, when we use the product of our consciousness and we sort of implement it through our will, we put it out into the air, something magical can happen. And I think the advent of the digital age, the advent of YouTube, the advent of sort of ultra spatial communication, transcending space and time, transcending our conditional barriers, has brought forth a tremendous amount of change in a very short period of time, as Carson kind of hinted to this in his answer. Frederick Douglass said in his speech, "What is 4th of July to the Negro?" He said that injustice would fall the more interconnected we become as human beings, as people. Now, Douglass could not have imagined in his ancient mindset a world where he could talk to someone who was 10,000 miles across the world with the click of a button. Douglass could not imagine that. And that simply reflects the eternal truth of these propositions. So why do I believe in the truth? because the truth is quite literally the only means by which I can operate in this world, whether people agree with that or not. 2 plus 2 will always equal 5, whether 4, excuse me, 4. God, someone's gonna
Christian
take it out of
Watson
context.
exposed.
No, 4. Someone's gonna. Okay, God, have mercy. I was been inspirational, and boy, I just break down. Okay, 4. It will always equal 4, regardless of if. Okay, I'm okay. I tried. Okay, guys. Okay, just that's why. Okay, I'm done. I'm quitting while I'm ahead. Okay, I'm done.
Well,
I'm done.
I like to weigh in
I
on the question
tried. Yeah,
myself.
Cafe, you saved me. Okay, you saved
No,
me,
I
man.
think
I
you
tried.
did great. I wouldn't worry about
I
it.
tried. I tried
wouldn't-
preaching, man.
You
You
have been
go.
exposed, but it's okay. Look, I just wanted to say that given Carson's response, I mean, this still is a debate, so I do want to get this last sort of point in. I thought it was interesting in his response how he said that all of humanity had things like states and had things like some sort of hierarchy, like until the very recent idea of like anarchism and like freedom, right? And I think that the issue is that he's proving my point because the more minarchist we've become, like the more Lockean, the more of the idea of the founding fathers, the more progress we've seen in our economics, the more we've seen redistribution, right? But that's also come with some neoliberal reform that have come in the process. So, for example, if you look like at aggregate wealth and access of things like education, they increased after the 1940s because there was some sort of public good nature aspect of like education, for example. So, like a mixture of minarchism and like a neoliberal economics is probably the best way to go. I think he's sort of proving that point. We don't have examples empirically of like anarcho-capitalism. Some people say Somalia, but that might be a little ridiculous and off topic. Look, I think that the point is, you said that we have to make the best of the world we have. I think that the best of the world we have is all the empirical examples of minarchism every time it works under like the sort of constitutional framework of the founding fathers. So like, let's use that example that we've seen in the real world work and let's bring it back, right?
Yeah, okay, no, that all makes sense. I guess even when stuff seems realistic, man will always cling to a small hope of truth and of right, as we've seen even in many wars where it's like a guaranteed loss, but yet they still fight just for the sake of upholding their values and beliefs. So I guess all those questions or all those responses really clarified it for me. So yeah, I appreciate the responses.
Thank you, Daniel. Please come back
We appreciate
anytime.
coming on.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Okay, guys. I think we're gonna probably end it there for a moment. But don't leave yet, guys, because when I say we're gonna end it all, if you flee the chat and don't do that yet. So I got one announcement to make. So tomorrow I will be interviewing Brian Hyde, who is a radio show host out of Utah. I'll be interviewing him through either 2 or 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll figure it out. I'll tell you guys later, but please tune in around then. Tonight, a video about intergenerational trauma is coming out. I'm going to be addressing the Indigenous riots over in Canada because a lot of people seem to be justifying those riots with sort of, intergenerational trauma. I think that's nonsense. And if you guys would like to, if you want to connect with me and my community, please join the Discord. The Discord is very, very important to contacting me, to being a part of the community. And look, the Discord link is right there. And I would appreciate it if all of you, including you, French Roller, clicked the link so you can join the Discord. So, but beyond all of that, know something. I love every single one of you. And the fact that you sat here for about almost 2 hours and listened to people talk about minarchy and anarchism and political concepts, things that are somewhat higher than our everyday natural condition, reflects something beautiful about your soul. And so keep having that beautiful soul. And yes, I took that from a song, and you'll find out what song it is if you look it up. Keep having that beautiful soul, keep aspiring to higher things, and keep thinking for yourself, because ultimately at the end of the day, all you have is your consciousness. All you have is the tools and the faculties that you have been endowed with by nature. That's all you have. That's all you will have at the end of this life, my friends. So stay inspired, stay hopeful, join the Discord, and most importantly, my friends, stay pensive. Bye, guys.